meeting of the Finance and Operations Committee will please come to order. I just want to note that Director Mitchell has now joined us. The district posted this evening's agenda to board docs at least 24 hours prior to the commencement of this meeting. Is there a motion to approve that previously posted agenda?
So moved.
Thank you. Are there any amendments to offer?
Yes, there's one amendment tonight. There was a error on the agenda, the actual summary within the agenda showing the previous proposed tax increase. It has been updated to reflect the tax increase for tonight's presentation of 1.01%.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. Will anyone move to add the described item to the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. The agenda with any approved amendments that Mr. Rogers described has been moved and seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Those opposed, please signify by saying I oppose and state your name for the record. Those abstaining, please signify by saying I abstain and state your name for the record. The motion carried. I will now turn over the Finance and Operations Committee meeting to my co-chair, Director Warsavage.
Thank you very much, President Brown. Mr. Rogers, would you mind going through the agenda items that we have on the table for this evening, and then you can launch right into agenda item number 1.
Sure. So tonight we have 2 agenda items. The first up is the 22-23 final budget presentation, which will require board action. We'll go through, we're making the presentation in compliance with the Act 1 timeline. We'll present the 22-23 final general fund budget, and the general fund budget has taken all available and relevant information into consideration at this time and is presented with a 1.01% tax increase. The second item would be policies for board action, policy 004 membership and 808 food service. So at this time, we'll jump right into the budget presentation. So again, tonight we are presenting the final 22-23 budget. So again, an overview of the Act 1 timeline and how we've gotten to this point. So back in November, on November 23rd of 2021, we had a presentation at the committee meeting to discuss the idea of a preliminary budget versus an accelerated opt-out. And at that time, we knew that the base index was 3.4% and our adjusted index was 5%. On December 7th, the December voting meeting, the board approved a resolution not to exceed 5%, a 5% tax increase for the 22-23 fiscal year. On May 10th, the board adopted the proposed final budget, which was at a 2.5% tax increase. That same night, the proposed final budget in the Form PDE 2028 was made available for public inspection and has been made available for public inspection since. On June 7th, the district published a notice of the intent to adopt the final budget tonight, June 21st. So again, June 21st, we are obviously before the board and the public today to give the final presentation. Following this meeting, the board will vote on a resolution to adopt the final budget. I just note here, as we always do, based on the Act 1 timeline, the latest date the board can adopt the final budget is June 30th. So we'll just go through quickly. Historically, we show this slide quite a few times throughout the year, and we continue to show it. It's just a historical representation of the past 6 years' tax increases compared to the base 1 index and the adjusted index for each year. So you can see this year our base index again is 3.4% with an adjusted index of 5%. Similar time frame, you can see back to 2015. We actually add the year 2015 to this slide versus the previous. That shows the change here of revenues versus expenditures and the amount of fund balance used to balance the budget in each of those years. So back in 15-16, you can see it's 2.5 million and it jumps to 6.5. That year, the direct impact there was a 0% tax increase. Since then, we have worked our way in an attempt to get back closer to where we were in 15-16 as far as what we were projecting as a use of fund balance to actually have what we would consider a balanced budget. We'll get into the use of fund balance a little bit more in future slides. But the idea here fundamentally is historically the district has had vacancies throughout the year. We budget staffing at 100% in hopes that you staff buildings from the first day of school to the last day at 100%. No turnover, no vacancies, and if you do have at least have quick vacancies. You want to make filling those positions. Historically, that's not what has happened. It's not what happens in most districts because of our size, and at times, sometimes our staff become a little more transient. We have experienced, a larger gap of funds unspent that are budgeted. So that's where that use of fund balance comes in, showing that actually if you spend it all, you would use the fund balance, but we know historically that's not the case, and therefore we're comfortable going out with a budget with a use of fund balance. So as it stands right now, with all the budget assumptions that we have, all the information that we've gathered over the past few months, we're comfortable going out with actually reducing the tax increase from the proposed budget of 2.5 down to 1.01%. Now, 1.01 sounds like a interesting number. It's really a 1%. What happens is, as you put it into the state's form, they have their own calculation, and sometimes it just will tick up or down a little bit. So that's the closest we could get to the 1% tax increase. Again, 3.4 with the base, 5% adjusted. We are well below the base, let alone the adjusted index. And I want to explain here, how we got from a 2.5 to a 1%. And you'll see that we're actually projecting less use of fund balance than we had at 2.5. So going in both directions, both positive. So we presented previously the governor's proposed budget for basic ed state funding would have given the district, if approved at the current proposed budget amount, $24 million, 24.16. In this current budget, what we actually built in, the proposed budget had level funding, what we were approved for this current school year. We had projections come out from PASBO, which is one of our leading sources of information for state budgeting reasons and many other things. They are predicting a gap of anywhere from $300 million to $500 million that they believe to be where the final budget will land. And we don't know right now, so we have to project. So based on the low end of their projection, $300 million of additional funding for basic ed, it would provide the district, and this is all-inclusive, basic ed and level up funding, $5.37 million on the low end. That's what we included in this budget. So going into the final budget, we are projecting out an add of about $5.3 million in basic ed funding. Now, when you move the special ed, if the proposed budget went through, we'd get an additional $2.18 million. Based on those same type of parameters, PASBO came out and said, here's your range. We went on the low range. It really only works out to an extra $51,000 for special ed. What's also included here, again, and we've discussed this, is the 2022 bond issuance. So the cost for the first year's principal interest payment will likely be all interest, but is included in this budget as a projection. This is a change from the proposed. The proposed budget had roughly $9 million in ESSER funding spending. We've had time to really narrow down the plan, and we have actually added to this. So now it's 17 versus the 9, which is where you'll see also an increase in our expenditures. When you budget federal funds, it's a zero-sum game. For every expenditure dollar you budget the same dollar in revenue. So it has there's a $0 effect on your bottom line, meaning there is no impact to the use of fund balance because of this, but we wanted to show our best effort in what do we think we will spend during 22-23. And we're working through all of those scheduling. Obviously, the ESSER funding, ARP funding, it all goes all the way out till September of 2024. So a lot of money approved through different timeframes. So we do think we put our best foot forward here, and we'll stay within reason. I will say that by the end of the year, we may spend more, we may spend less, but those revenue dollars will match one for one, and in turn not have an impact to our bottom line. The final piece here is just kind of like disclosure. We made additional adjustments throughout the budget from the proposed to the final for any additional informations we had. So what may have been projected or an analysis of some sort to get us to the proposed budget, any information we've gotten since then, we've put final numbers in. So a good example would be the district's insurance, liability insurance, property insurance. We were going through cybersecurity insurance. We went through and got all of our final numbers. Everything's finalized. So those numbers are now reflecting in the final budget versus we were projecting out costs in the proposed. So again, we'll pull this is the same slide as the proposed budget and the previous committee meeting when we provided the May update. No change here. So we'll go through just quickly where we are as it stands. So it's in comparison to the current year budget versus 22-23. So the revenues here on this first line are represented net of a tax increase. So it's as if we had a 0% tax increase. That's $238 million, $238.8 million. Our expenditures are at 244.3, which would leave us with the expenditures exceeding revenues by 5.5 million. When you factor in the 1.01% tax increase, that adds roughly 1.1 million in additional revenue, leaving us with 4.4 committed to balance the budget, meaning that's the expected use of fund balance. Now, what I'll say here, going back to the previous slide when we talked about the 2.5 million that had been projected out for many years, that's back in 2016. We've now come about 7 years, and you're looking at where are we at now, especially with the national teacher shortage. What are we looking at? That 4.4 is actually, the majority of it is what's projected around 3 million, just under $3 million, and what we believe will not be spent on salaries. It could be higher depending on what the actual impact of the national shortage is. In addition to that, there's about 1.5 that last budget we built in as well. Now, those contingencies are built into the budget for a few reasons. One of which, to Mr. Neal's point in the previous meeting, was what happens when the ESSER funding goes away. So the way that it's been talked about in the business community for schools is that you don't want to fall off the cliff, right? Years and years ago when previous stimulus money came out, it was pushed, hire staff, get more adults in front of children. The problem is when it went away, most districts couldn't sustain the staff they brought in under that. I think, and I know that had a major, major impact on us, more so than most districts that I've ever seen. So with that being said, and at that time, I was actually an auditor of school districts, so that I was, I went through multiple school districts in a given year and saw how it impacted many different districts. So when this funding came out, all of a sudden everybody was saying, don't fall off the cliff, don't fall off the cliff. We were well aware of it. And what happened was we took portions of our budget and where we were supplementing ESSER funds, whether it be something like Lightspeed, a software, technology, anything like that, we shifted, covered it with ESSER, and then we bolstered last year our contingency fund, which is an expenditure line item that you hope not to spend. What's in there now in that 1.5 it's money that was shifted from tech, from curriculum, from these different areas that we know that when ESSER goes away, that contingency line item in the expense will be moved right back into the budget, and that's how we won't fall off the cliff. So at that point, that 1.5 won't be contingency anymore. It'll be moved up into our actual budget in 24-25. So that was built in last year. It continues this year. You don't want to see your expenditures dive down and then drive back up based on just using federal funding. And that's where if you do it in that way, you would be in a situation where you're looking at a major tax increase over, I would say, not just 1 year, 2 or 3, just to make up the difference. It's similar to the slide showing the 0%. You'll never make that up unless you go far above and beyond what you're comfortable doing, right? So if you went up 2.5 in a given year, or over that course of time, you would have had to go up another percentage above it just to make up for it over the course of 3 to 5 years. So that's where we have been very flexible and creative in where the funds are. So with the 1.5 plus the roughly 3 million, just short of 3 million in what we believe to be a projected unspent money due to turnover over the next year. And that was projected off of a 10-year analysis and looking at not only salaries but also the benefits. So Social Security, PSERS, all of the fringe benefits that the district is one required and others offered through union agreements. So you'll see that roughly covers the entire use of fund balance. So what we have here as a use of fund balance is truly a balanced budget, in my opinion. There are other things that are very notable to point out. And this was in the proposed budget. We had moved, I discussed it during the presentation, but we have moved funds into the facilities budget to be able to cover future projects. Over the past 4 to 5 years, we've been issuing bonds to cover existing building maintenance and repairs. And we've been pushing out roughly $5 million projects at a time per year. So what we've done here is we've been able to create a general fund budget associated with the upkeep of our buildings and push those funds over so that that becomes sustainable for, at a minimum, through these ESSER times. And if we were to be in a situation where we need some flexibility, it's built in through that area. The other thing that we were able to pull off this year, prior years, we've always issued what's called a lease to purchase. You essentially finance buying technology and buses. So you purchase the technology, the bank gives you essentially a 5-year loan, and you pay it off over 5 years. It was a mechanism, a finance mechanism to flatten out the costs over the years in prior years. When we originally got our ESSER funding, we didn't need to use the lease purchase for technology because the ESSER funds were there to cover it. So over the past couple of years, we've actually cut out the technology side. We've continued to purchase vehicles, buses, and maintenance vehicles. But in this given year, we were able to remove the lease purchase program and cover the costs in the budget. So moving forward, we'll be able to just direct purchase these items without having to incur short-term, slightly, I'd call it midterm debt going out only 5 years. It was a good program, but as that comes off and we pay off the outstanding, the dollar amount goes down each year. It'll be a savings to the district and the budget every year for now for the next 3 to 4 years. So we'll actually be able to use that savings to offset future budgets as well. But as it stands, we are at a 1.01% tax increase with a $4.46 million use of fund balance that we hope will not be utilized based on our projections. So the impact for the annual tax impact on a taxpayer, you can see here I adjust this slightly. It's 1.01. It's still the same dollar amounts that were here previously because that 0.01, you really get down to the penny. But you can see anywhere from $12 to $86, depending on the individual assessment of the home. And I'll just follow back up again. Tonight, we will ask the board immediately following this meeting at a special voting meeting to vote on this budget. And again, the latest the board can adopt a final budget would be June 30th. At this time, does the board have any questions?
I don't have any questions. I can't let this go by again without saying a few things about, I think people fundamentally don't always understand why we have to raise taxes every year. And so obviously we're in extraordinarily inflationary times, right? But even in non-inflationary times, the cost of living rises every year. And, many people, maybe even most people, get annual raises for performance and experience, but also for cost of living. And our teachers do. Our teachers in their contract have raises. And so the question is simply just where does that money come from? And a chunk of our money comes from the state and a tiny bit comes from federal sources. And a large chunk of it comes from our local real estate taxes and our properties aren't reassessed every year. And so that money, that pot of money doesn't grow. And by the way, if I say anything that's really wrong, Craig, maybe just don't say it now, tell me later. No, say it now. That pot of money doesn't grow unless we grow it. And then we grow it by raising the rates. And it stinks, and none of us want to pay it, but we pay it because we're all residents of the district. And so we have this this Act 1 index that the legislature has put in, and I think the idea of the Act 1 index is to set a limit on how much we can raise taxes, and I think it exists in an attempt to sort of not overburden taxpayers. But there's going to be some. What am I saying that's really wrong, Craig?
I'll let you finish, but you're going to strike a nerve.
Okay. Well, let me finish what I'm saying, and then you can address it. But I feel like the reality is sort of right there in the numbers, right? Like if it exists not to overburden taxpayers, but the base index is 2.5% to 3.5%, that's basically the legislature admitting that we can't operate without doing this every year, right? Like that's basically the legislature saying, you can only raise it this much, but we'll let you raise it this much because we know that otherwise you basically couldn't operate, right? And we in Upper Darby are one of many districts that has an adjusted index that's significantly higher because, again, there's a recognition that we have greater hurdles to meet. We have greater challenges that require us, except those challenges are exactly those that make it harder for our community. It just blows me away. It's a complete acknowledgement by our state legislature that our state funding is inadequate. It just amazes me. So anyway, it's exciting that it's only 1% this year. That's the lowest it's been in quite a while. Thank you, Mr. Rogers, for all of your incredibly hard work on that. And also, I should add that we get to do this without really knowing what the numbers are. So as you said, we have our best guesses from PASBO. Thank you, PASBO, for whispering down the lane and giving us some idea with the crystal ball, but the state hasn't passed its budget because that's how this works all the time. And I know I'm preaching to the choir, but I don't know, sometimes you got to preach to the choir. So anyway, thanks, Mr. Rogers. And now go ahead and correct me on anything I'm wrong on.
Not that you were wrong. I think it goes one level deeper. You got very, very close, and I think you were trying to get there. It shows how fundamentally wrong it is when we have an adjusted index, Upper Darby School District, that is adjusted based on aid ratios and economic impacts of what makeup does our community have. So we have an adjusted index of 5%. You, Upper Darby, us, we can increase the taxes up to 5% without even having under an opt-out, no referendum, no exceptions. Yet, surrounding districts who are more affluent can only increase to the base index because when they go through the calculation, their adjusted is the base index. So the formula says, Upper Darby, you're underfunded, you're overburdened from a tax perspective, but you can increase your taxes higher than an affluent community can. You have the ability to increase them higher. It's interesting, and you can see that there are affluent communities who have used exceptions to go above their index, which have caused problems. And, that's where you have to be very careful in how you manage it. But just to dovetail right on to your point, just add that little piece, what's it really showing of how they want a district to balance their budget?
Yeah, you used the word interesting. I think we can come up with some other words, but we'll keep it PG.
I think the community will be at least acknowledge, or hopefully they will acknowledge that we're being fiscally responsible. I mean, 1% with everything that they're going through now with inflation. Dr. Haig hit a lot of important points with inflation and COVID and all of the other issues they have to worry about, and then realizing that a tax increase is coming. To keep it at 1% with all of the challenges we have, I think is really showing that we're fiscally responsible and that we're doing what's right. And it could get better based on us not knowing the fund balance and how much we're actually going to use. So it could even get better and we would have more money in our fund balance. So I just want to commend you. I'm going to give you a round of applause if we can do that for all your expertise and your hard work. I think we are in the shape we are primarily because of your expertise and your hard work and truly being fiscally responsible as a taxpayer. I personally thank you for doing that and for your expertise and being a good steward of the meager resources that we have. So thank you for that.
Yeah, just a comment. Craig, Mr. Rogers, sorry. I want to be formal. You are an incredible asset to this district, so I just want to say thank you. You really allow me to sleep soundly at night knowing that the finances of this district are in great hands. And probably Dr. McGarry can sleep soundly at night too, knowing that as well, I'm sure. So I just want to publicly on the record say thank you so much. I know that we truly think of you as an incredible asset. I just want to make sure the public realizes that as well, that you're one of a kind, that without you, I honestly, I don't know where Upper Darby would be. So I appreciate you for all the hard work that you've done over the years and for the future too. Thank you.
Guys are all going to call me Donnie Downer after this. So everything goes without saying. Obviously, I think highly of everything. If you go back to that one slide that from 2016. Okay, so a couple things. We've talked before about the effects of 2016 and I think 2019 on recurring income. If you tell me that like we have recovered from those years or very close to it, then I'm good. I'm good right there. That's always something that's been on my mind, that like that recurring money that we're not getting from the 0% year and the 1.9 year, are we getting, like, have we gotten to a point where we've made that up? So that's one thing. I know too that transfer revenues we're taking a loss on. If you tell me that that's not going to hurt us, that we've recovered from that, then I'm good with that as well. I trust you on the numbers. If you tell me that we can do this year, and it's not, next year we're not going to wish that we had done like 1.5, then I know you can't guarantee that. Then I'm good there. And I know Dan's going to jump in because I've mentioned this to him before. But again, it goes without saying. I trust your numbers, I trust your math, I trust your professionalism, and this is just, I have to ask, so peace of mind and that kind of thing. So thanks a lot.
In an effort not to be the hyperbolic, I do want to echo the sentiments of everybody here that, Craig's expertise is second to none. And I also want to just say that, and I hope nobody took this the wrong way over the weekends and the emails, but there is a lot of work that goes above and beyond the regular day and communications and back and forth and trying to figure this out. There's a lot of hours and time, and the entire administration is constantly, Ed Marshallak trying to fine-tune special education costs that were skyrocketing over a period of time, and then working with Craig to try to get a real fundamental balance financially to what that looks like. And curriculum instruction, working out, 3-year, 5-year, and how that comes to a place. And we just had probably a 2.5-hour meeting today over staffing. And I've said publicly many times with Craig, we can't put Craig in a situation where it's like we're going to go out there and roll over staffing in this current environment, tax people at a high amount, and then on some level not knowing what we can hire or not hire. We've got to be realistic because people are hurting right now, right? There's a lot of that going on. There was a high, and for every high there's a low. The other key to this, two things. We certainly need funding. I mean, this slide shows, as Dr. Haig pointed out, I'm sorry to point in front of your face, that the percentages we should. If you talk to a bond council, they'll tell us you should be going to 3.4, if not 5, every year. Do it. To your point, not that you're saying we should go to 5, but your concern is, hey, tax-wise each year, I also don't want to have one year where it's like a big hit. Well, that's the issue, and I don't want to use game because that will come back to haunt me, but The issue that we're up against is there are so many unknowns that we have to handle. Is it 24 million? Well, 24 million is a game changer. If we were getting that dollar amount appropriately every year, we probably wouldn't have teacher turnover. It'd be a much more stable market. The balancing of the budget would be more stable every year because you wouldn't anticipate the 8%, 5%, 6%. Add now to these federal one-time dollars that make his job, Craig's job, even more complicated of balancing the budget, put it in the budget, told not to put it in the budget, but then put it in the budget, and then accounting for that when it's gone and trying to project that out over the next 3 to 5 years. So, of course, there's risk in a 1% tax increase, but there's also a risk in your community going so high that they've had enough and they can't sustain it, and it drives the home values down. We've got to continue to advocate for what Dr. Haig, I think, was pointing out very well in the beginning, which is there's a fundamental issue. Either public schools are important in the state of Pennsylvania or they're not. And until we drive that point home, we can't come out here because most people don't tune in, no offense to those paying attention, until this happens. And they want to know why. I've experienced it. I've experienced public forums and communications about staffing. We're in a staffing crisis right now. We've talked about that for a long time. What will staffing look like going in the next year, but the next 3 to 5 years until the profession is respected? So we need to advocate for the appropriate percentage coming from federal and state funding of schools, a changing attitude toward the profession, which would then create more certainty in our teachers and our work environment, and then we wouldn't have to have this state of flux. What we've pulled off and what Craig has put together on top of fixing some of the schools and moving that forward and creatively using this one-time money proves that if we are funded appropriately, Don, and you said this was your point to me the other day, you know, if we're funded appropriately, we have a much different set of circumstances. Home values would be seen different. The school would be seen different, right? So the advocacy has to be, hey, members of the public, we fine-tune this budget with this school board to this percentage to live to advocate for another day. We need 5% more in our budget, but we're not going to get it from you directly. We need to keep advocating for that, right? That's the issue that we're up against right now. We still have teacher salaries to handle, administrative salaries to handle, and thank God people are staying here right now working for the same mission and vision. But if we were to get $24 million, we'd be coming back to this board and saying, open the teacher's contract, let's recruit people differently, and accelerate even more the facilities project. So there is some risk associated with this, but I think the key point that Dr. Haig pointed out is it's kind of a ridiculous, it's an oxymoron. It's like feather of lead from Shakespeare, right? It's this idea of you're taxing those who really shouldn't be taxed the most to cover the costs. And instead of acknowledging we should be funding them appropriately so the school district are treated as a positive. So I'm hearing some concerns about the governor's budget. There's this attitude that school districts don't need it. So I think we all need to pick up the phone. I sent an email to our representatives last week advocating them for, at a minimum, the level up funding to come in at a higher dollar amount if we don't get the full 24 million. But we need the 24 million. And I don't think Craig is presenting a budget that doesn't say that. I think we're saying to our public, we're trying to be realistic with what's in front of us and the unknowns, and we're going to try to give you that now while we can.
Any other comments from board members? Seeing none, I believe we can move on to the next agenda item.
So next we have agenda item number 2, which is policy 004, membership, and 808 food service. And at this time, I'll hand it over to Director Desnoyers.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. As Mr. Rogers just stated, there are 2 policies being reviewed at this evening's meeting. Policy 004, there are no changes to the policy itself, but the State Ethics Commission has issued a new statement of financial interests in a new easy-to-fill-in format, and so for members of the public, the statement of financial interests must be filed by each school board member and certain administrators in the district each year. That is filed to indicate anything that could be perceived as a conflict of interest.
Mr. Desnors, I just wanted to clarify, it's just the form that they updated. It's not anything about the requirements of the act that have changed.
Okay, thank you. So it's just the form has been updated, not the information being requested on the form. Thank you. And then policy 808, food services, is being updated. This has to do with alternative meal provisions and situations when a student's account has insufficient funds, but because the district participates in a federal program whereby the district offers 2 free meals to each student every day, these changes don't really apply to us. So that's all I have.
Thank you so much. Any comments or feedback from board members? All right, seeing none, we are at the time for public comment for the Finance and Operations Committee meeting. As Dr. McGarry had mentioned earlier, we will be taking comment from people who are physically present first, and then defer to people who are online. Seeing no comments from people physically present, Mrs. Buford, do we have any comments from people online or over the phone?
We have a comment from Ms. Aloni Shabani, located at 290 Childs Avenue in Drexel Hill. This comment was received on the 21st at 6:12 p.m. via email regarding agenda item number 1. And the comment reads, "I vote no to 2.5% tax increase. For 2 years, we paid taxes to close, excuse me? We're good? Excuse me. For 2 years, we paid taxes to close down schools. No one cared that our kids were not inside the buildings. We still paid taxes. We received zero money back. Now you want to take more of our hard-earned money. Please stop raising taxes. How about an audit to find out who's paying their taxes? The people who are paying shouldn't have to carry the burden of the non-paying ones. I know there are many people in Upper Darby Township who aren't paying or unable to do so. We all are struggling. Please stop increasing our taxes. Thank you."
Wonderful. I believe I can turn review the agenda items for this evening, sir. Mr. Rogers?
So before I review the agenda items, I just want to take an opportunity to say thank you for all the kind words. But just to be clear about something, when we build our budget, it's not all on me. we have a great team around us, and I meet with every department head who manages their own budget, and they give input. And this year, more than years before, have been extremely flexible and creative in how we move this budget forward, specifically out of special ed. Ed Marshallak and his team of supervisors, they came into my office like an army and put forward one of the most creative budgets I've seen since I've been here. The amount of work that the supervisors and Ed have put forward over the past few years just shows that their hard work actually put us in a really good financial position out of special ed. So I'd be remiss if I don't give credit where credit's due. And obviously our leadership from Dr. McGarry is second to none, and he always is very supportive, just as the board is, and you guys make it possible for us to be able to do the work that we're doing. So with that said, the first agenda item was the 22-23 final budget presentation. We reviewed the Act 1 timeline, discussed where we are with the final budget at a 1.01% tax increase. We're asking for board action to move it forward to the special voting meeting following this committee meeting.
I believe there is consensus.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
And
Yes.
the second agenda.
Yes.
The second agenda, policies for board action, 004 membership and 808 food service. Would the board like to move forward?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
That's it.
All right, thank you very much, and I will return the meeting back to President Brown.
Thank you, Dr. Ward Savage. Great job. A motion is in order for the adjournment of the Finance and Operations Committee meeting. Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Meeting adjourned.